Hey there, and welcome to the Upside Down People podcast. Today's guest is a children's ministry pastor, author, and mother. She's known for her thoughts on raising children in this cultural moment and has recently published her book, Impress. I'm grateful to spend time and have this conversation with Ainsley Freeman. Well, welcome to the Upside Down People podcast, Ainsley. So glad to be having a conversation with you here today. How are you going?
Thank you. I'm well, thank you, Caleb, and I'm really pleased to be here with you.
Well, just to sort of kick it off, you're an author. You've recently written a book called Impress, Why the Hard Work of Passing on Faith to Our Kids is the First Importance and How We Can Do It. Thanks for sending me a copy as well.
Pleasure.
My wife doesn't read a lot of books. She probably averages maybe one, maybe two a year. And she's read this from cover to cover and really enjoyed it. So that's saying something.
Oh, that's a huge testimonial. Thank you for sharing that. That's great.
So she's been, when it first arrived, she went through it first, and I was impressed by that because I was like, whoa, something's like tracked her attention, and it's not that she doesn't like reading, she just lives a full life, and if she picks up a book and finishes it, it means something. So I'm keen to tease out some of your thoughts there. So you're an author. What else do you do? Who is Ainsley Freeman?
Well, I guess I am most importantly a wife and mother, which is, I guess part of the whole premise of the book and why I've written it. I have 3 primary school age sons, and we live in Sydney, Australia. Together with my husband, we lead a church, and we've also had a history of church planting before our current church that we lead together. And I work for a ministry organisation as well called Olive Tree Media. And I'm a bit of a blend between someone who likes to write and speak and do ministry side of things, and also someone who loves systems and tech and databases and websites and spreadsheets. And so I'm I sit somewhere in between those spaces. And so my work at church and my work with the ministry organisation is really straddling and bringing those two things together.
Wow. And what have you enjoyed most about those various different roles that you find yourself in?
Well, I think I accidentally ended up doing a very strange degree. When I was at Bible college, I did a Bible college part theology degree, and I moved into what's called a Bachelor of Christian Studies, and you do 2 years at Bible college and 1 year at a secular university, and you write a project to link the 2 areas of study. And interestingly, what I do for work is a complete mirror of what I did at uni. And so I do love that I feel like I'm really living out a calling and also a skill base that I developed in my late teens and early 20s.
Awesome.
And I just love the balance. I love the fact that I can, dive into the word. I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of preaching and presenting and speaking. I have days where I spend the whole day looking at spreadsheets and tech, and I work from home a lot, and that's great for family life because I have this beautiful flexibility where I can stand on the sidelines of sporting games and turn up to assemblies. And so for me, the balance of all of that is a beautiful ability that I have, and I feel very privileged to live in the life that I currently have.
Yeah, awesome. And something I like asking every now and then my guests, just put them on the spot a bit, but if you could relate to one either fictional character or movie character or book, who would that be and why?
Oh my goodness, what a tricky one. Look, the first thing that came to mind is, I don't know if you know the play called Hating Alice and Ashley.
No.
It's a very old, 90s play where there's this really sensible girl and she's the main character, and I played that character when I was a kid, and I think there's very much part of me and who I am that's a rule follower, that likes to do the right thing, that has that kind of like don't break the mold kind of mentality. But I guess part of the reason why that comes to mind is that when I was a kid, I loved acting and performing and drama, and I think that really equipped me as well for who I am today, and getting up and presenting and doing things. And people often ask me, do you ever get nervous? And I'm like, I'm only nervous until the thing is written, and the minute I put the last full stop on the last word, I have no nerves. So I think that's just a privilege that doing drama and performing as a teenager and as a young kid has helped me today.
Yeah, so you don't struggle with the fear or the anxiety that comes with being judged or being criticized, or that vulnerability when you've completed your work and presenting it. That's not something that you're bothered with?
No, I think I had to learn and grow into what it looks like to be vulnerable from a platform, and work out how I feel in that space. So I think there's certain conversations, after a sermon that might make me a little bit nervous. The person that's going to march up to you with their Bible and start asking you really deep questions about the things that you said. That makes me a little bit intimidated, that some might want to tease apart the words that I said.
Right.
But yeah, the actual getting up and being vulnerable, I think for me, I've decided where the boundaries are when I've written the talk or the presentation or the sermon. And so by the time it's written, I feel really comfortable and confident with the words that are on the page. And so I just get up and go for it at that point.
That's so good. And what would you say to people then who struggle with that, who when they get up there, they're thinking more about what others' perceptions or opinions may be than what they feel like they've been given to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think the huge part is really focusing on the message that you've been delivered. So quite contrary to my speaking, when it came to telling people that I'd written a book, I found that quite a lot more of a vulnerable experience of like, oh, goodness me, I have written a book and now I have to tell people that I've written a book.
Right.
But kind of, I guess the similar advice is about you've got to be really confident that the message is right, and it doesn't matter about you, and it doesn't matter about, how you bring it, but if God has given you a message, and if you feel confident in the actual message, then just seeing yourself as a conduit of that message is probably, I guess, the best attitude to have. And I think for me, when I prepare a sermon or a talk, by the time I've written it, I really feel comfortable and confident in what's on the page. And I think, I think for people to really be reminded of, it's about the message. It's not about you and who you are and kind of feeling insecure about yourself, but being secure and confident in the message that you're bringing.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. So let's talk about the work that you've done in Impress. So I think a good starting point would just be, what does it mean and how can we define Impress? I think the reason I'm really fascinated to have this conversation is because, so I've got a young daughter who's coming on to 3 pretty quick, and then I've got probably by the time this podcast comes out, I'll have our second daughter as well.
Oh, wow.
So I'm thinking about what it means to raise these girls in the culture that we live in, and also like what it means to be an intentional father, and my wife wants to be an intentional mother, and how we can really invest and see this as a gift that God's given us, and nurture it, and leave a good impression, and then with all of that, obviously there's turmoil in the culture we find ourselves in. So there's a lot of fear and anxiety around parenting. I think statistics show that people are either having kids at a later age, or they just choosing not to have families, and just living that double income, no kids life. But it goes to show that there's this fear that people either don't want to bring other human beings into the world they find themselves in because they're worried or they're scared and there's this anxiety. Or it's just fulfilling a selfish desire that let's just focus on ourselves, which I think both are wrong, and both at the heart of it there's issues of pride and fear, and so I think it's an important conversation because so many people like myself are thinking like, how do we like raise our kids in a godly manner, without fear, and without anxiety, and making decisions based out of freedom, the freedom that we find and have in Christ. And then alongside that, I think you wrote it at the very start of your book. You said, I've just written down the quote here, when our children graduate from high school, we will have used up more than 90% of our in-person time with them. And that's just crazy. So yeah, to think of that, like I've got a little 3-year-old now, or she's almost 3, and like a vast majority of my time with her will be the first 17, 16 years of her life. And then the remainder of her life, which I'm hoping is a lot longer than that, it just makes up this really small amount. So that goes to show that we really have to be intentional about the way we look at things and the way we approach children, raising children. But at the same time, we don't want to like be fearful in that approach, because then we can end up hurting and harming them because we're scared and we're making decisions not based on, just this freedom we have in Christ and knowing that they're a gift. But yeah, so that's sort of like the thoughts, and then you've written this amazing book. You've done a lot of thinking in it. So yeah, let's start off. What does it mean, and how do you define impress?
Well, I chose the word impress because you find it in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And I've read that passage a lot. You know, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. These commandments are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. And one day I read that, and it was like the word impress just jumped out at me because of its double meaning. We are instructed to impress, as in imprint, as in place something upon our children. But in our modern lives, we are always drawn to this desire to be impressive and to impress the world and be impressive and to be seen as successful and to be seen as a good parent is part of that matrix. Yeah. And part of the anxiety, I think, for parents is how visible and public we've made our lives. So they need to appear to be better than possibly 20 years ago, because no one saw your washing basket on your lounge room floor unless they were invited into your home, and at that point you had time to move it. But now it's like our lives are online. Everyone sees more because we post more, right? We can always choose not to show our life. Yeah. But so I think that double meaning of impress really drew me into the project of this book, which was to look at what's going on in our modern families. What are the big changes that have happened? Why are families different now to what they were a generation ago? And what does it look like for us as a parent, a generation of parents, to pass on faith and to kind of imprint Christ and the way of Jesus and the words of Scripture into the lives of our kids. And so that for me is what impress is all about. It's to resist the temptation to be impressive and instead to prioritize passing on faith to our kids.
Yeah, that's a huge one. I love that double meaning as well, because like I was at the playground the other day with my daughter, and she started like throwing a tantrum essentially, because she was firstly overtired. So that was bad on my part, keeping her out longer than she should have been. But then my immediate thought is like, how are other people perceiving me in this moment? And like, I was then sort of doing this like self-analysis of like, oh, I wonder how like now my actions, how I engage with her, other people are judging or criticizing. And I feel like you're 100% correct, because our lives are so online. When we go out into the world, we hyper aware that people are judging and are taking note of how we parent, which means we probably over or underreact, take one of the two responses, which is crazy. But then I love how you brought it back to actually making an impression on our children and what that looks like. Do you find, or have you found that a lot of parents are looking to institutions like the church or like schools particularly to make that impression on their kids? Is there a greater
100%.
demand?
Yeah, I think one of the big shifts in our generation of parents is the great era of outsourcing. We hardly do anything at home anymore. Part of that is our homes are smaller. Our homes, we're not home a lot. We work full time, or we are out and about. So our extracurriculars out of the home. Our music lessons are out of the home. We're doing more tutoring than we've ever done before. We spend more hours at school or traveling to school. We outsource cleaning. We outsource our garden care. We kind of, like, we just want to get as much things off our plate as possible because we're busier as a generation trying to pay for our humongous mortgages or the rent that's out of control. So it's a whole generational era of outsourcing. And I think part of that is the outsourcing of impressing faith is probably incredibly significant at the moment. And that was, again, a huge motivator for writing the book. It was looking at my peers, hearing stories of people, with kids, and there's so much about the faith piece that perhaps we feel inadequate to do at home. Perhaps we kind of don't know what to do, or maybe what was modeled to us we didn't like. Okay. So we're trying to create a new version. But in the end, what we're hoping is the church will do that.
Right.
The Sunday school teachers, the youth leaders, or we'll send our kids to a Christian school and that will solve the problem, and they'll get all their Jesus stuff by the Christian professionals that are the pastors. And having been a kids ministry pastor for a while, like, I found great joy and great fulfillment in thinking deeply about how to share faith with kids. But yet I only had them for 1 hour on a Sunday. Now as a parent, I've got like 167 other hours with these kids at home, and no one ever taught me or shared with me about that job, about what to do at home. What are some options? How are some ways to talk about God that's natural, that's authentic, that's deep? How do you approach and answer really difficult questions? How do you weave Bible study in? How do you weave memory verses? Like, all these things that they actually really kind of don't come naturally. It's not just like you birth a baby and all of a sudden you know how to talk to that child about faith. And most people haven't been to Bible college. So how are we equipping parents to do that job as their most important job?
Yeah, it's a whole heap of great questions, and I'd love to dive into them a bit deeper as well. And before we do, like, what would you say would be not a challenge? What's the difficulty or the harm in not taking this seriously, or in not really being intentional about the way we approach our family life. What's sort of the ramifications of that?
Yeah, well, we at Olive Tree Media, the organisation I work for, we interviewed a lady called Dana Robert, and she's a professor, and she was interviewed about basically how we've outworked the Great Commission. So how have we taken Jesus' words to go and make disciples and to go to the ends of the earth, as he says in Acts 1:8. And she talks to us about all the incredible missionary movements of taking the gospel from the backwaters of the Roman Empire to literally the ends of the earth. How have we evangelized the whole world? How have we gone into China and gone through, trekked through the Amazon jungle and found tribes in, the back blocks of places in Southeast Asia and in Africa? And how have we seen this incredible missionary movement start through the power of the Holy Spirit as people have confidently and courageously and sacrificially taken the gospel to the ends of the earth? And when we asked her, where are the ends of the earth today? Her response is, well, we can think of the ends of the earth horizontally, but we can also think of them vertically. And in many ways, the ends of the earth is the next generation, because we are always only one generation away from the gospel becoming extinct. And it's quite humbling to realize that the sacrifice, the courage, the effort of missionaries to take the gospel from the Roman Empire and just propel it horizontally is going to be a waste of time if we don't do the hard work as parents of bringing the gospel vertically and telling our kids the story of God. And so that's, I think, why it's important, because Jesus told us to go to the ends of the earth, and we can think of that horizontally, but we can also think of that vertically.
Yeah, and so while we're thinking of that vertically, then what are some challenges within this cultural moment that we find ourselves in passing on faith to our kids?
Well, I think there's always a cultural gap, right? From one generation to the next, there's always a gap. And there's an ABC parenting show on at the moment. And Maggie Dent, the parenting expert, says the problem is right now we don't have a cultural gap, a generational gap. We have a generational chasm. And I think the gap between our generation and the world our kids are being born into is huge. And you can look at technology, you can look at, the way that life is structured in terms of the busyness and the pace of life. You can look at the two-parent working household. You can look at family unit breakdown and change and blended families and divorce and single parents. And you look at all those factors, and it means that the work of translating the gospel is big, because their world is so different to our world. And the gap between us is big. Now, the work of any good missionary is to bridge a cultural gap or a language barrier. We've spent so much time translating the Bible into all these different heart languages of people. And I think as parents, we need to realize that we need to translate the gospel into the heart language of our kids, and that's going to require a bit of work and a bit of cultural kind of intelligence to work out how it's going to be received for them. So not just speaking our language, but speaking in their heart language.
Yeah, that's a super difficult thing to do. I was chatting to someone recently who was sharing a story about it sort of highlighted the cultural differences between the United States and Australia, and they're sharing about an Australian pastor who on Father's Day shared a story about himself, basically saying how great of a father he was. It was intentionally meant to encourage his congregation, but people ended up leaving because of that. But I think he is from America, so the cultural difference is that, in America, if you say you're a good father, it's almost like Paul saying, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And they respond really well to that. Whereas in an Australian culture, like that's looked at as really proud and boastful and arrogant. And it's almost like he should have translated the same message as saying, hey guys, I'm a father just like you. Let's look to Jesus and imitate him. It's fascinating how that like translation that he thought he was doing something that was helpful ended up harming or hurting a lot of people and driving them away, which wasn't his intent. But thinking then about parenting, like you're saying, how we are supposed to be thinking, how do we translate this message to make it applicable to our children's lives who are in a different generation, who receive information differently, or who understand things or just have different themes. That's a difficult task for anyone. There's skilled professors and people who their whole sole job is to translate things to different generations. And now as parents, it's like, that's a mammoth task, I feel. It's almost overwhelming. So how do you approach that?
Yeah, well, it is overwhelming. However, I think, the future is ancient, as some people are saying. And I think if we look back, probably the piece of the puzzle that we're missing is the art of storytelling. And when Moses tells the Israelites to impress faith on their children, he's talking about, or he uses the words, he's talking about the commandments, but he's actually talking about the story of God. You need to tell the story over and over and over again. Tell them about the Exodus. Tell them about the Red Sea. Tell them about the plagues. Tell them about the manna. Tell them the story of the 10 Commandments and the cloud and the day and the fire at night. And this is what we need to be doing. We need to be less focused on kind of, giving the 10 doctrines of the church or whatever, and better at storytelling and inviting our kids into this beautiful story that we've been captured in. And Jesus was a great storyteller, and it left people wondering. It left people going, wonder what that's all about. Even his nearest and dearest are like, Jesus, what was that? I do not understand what you're talking about. Yeah. But it invited kind of curiosity and wonder and questions. And I think we need to just be better at storytelling. And that's really, I think, where it starts with us as parents, is just telling the story of God to our kids in a way that draws them in, that invites their questions, that lets them wonder. Because I think that's really how we pass on faith, is to be just over and over telling the story of God to our kids so that they feel like they're part of this wonderful, wonderful story.
Yeah. How do you become a better storyteller if you haven't done drama, and if you haven't done any acting courses, or you're just horrible at English?
I'd be just reading books.
Reading books?
Yeah. I think that's the best way to kind of do it, is just find some great books and read them. Yeah.
I love that. My daughter loves the, I don't know if you know the Jesus Storybook Bible. So
it's my fave.
It's actually one of my favorite books as well. Yeah. Like, it's for her, but I enjoy reading it, which is such a...
we've given it to kids at dedications, and the parents, who maybe weren't... We've dedicated some kids for a family where they weren't churchgoers, like regular churchgoers, and the mum was reading the kids' Bible because it really helped her to understand. And the Jesus Storybook Bible, like I talk about it in my book as well, because it is all about the Bible being one unified, beautiful story. Yeah. And I think that that's something that we need to really help our kids grasp. That when we talk about Moses one week, and then we do the parable of the sower the other week, and then all of a sudden it's Easter and Jesus is rising from the dead, and then we've got like the angel appearing to Mary at Christmas, like how are those stories connected? Yeah. And Jonah and the whale, like what are we doing with our kids to help them understand and place that story? Yeah. And realize, and I think that Bible, like reading it cover to cover, is just awesome, because it just takes you through some of the the highlights reels of the Bible, but it always links it to the great narrative of Scripture.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you definitely hit the nail on the head in terms of how telling a story brings us into something that's greater than ourselves. And I think that's one of the issues I've found with our generation is that it's, and our culture actually, it's very like individualized. So everything is about ourselves and how we can get the best or the most out of things, or our consumer culture is again targeted at what we can benefit or what we can gain from it. So the whole narrative and story that the culture is feeding us is look into yourself to find the answer, to find what you want, and that will make you happy. But obviously with increasing rates of depression and anxiety and suicides, there's a disconnect there, because I think people can't look at themselves to find out how we belong. We need a community that we're surrounded by that is telling us and helping shape us and saying it's actually not about us, but it doesn't mean you're not important. It's actually the opposite. It's like you're a part of something so much greater than yourself. So use what God's given you to contribute to that story.
Yeah.
So I love what you're saying is like start thinking about this in a way that you're sharing stories with your kids.
Yeah, and I think a way to practice, like, one of the interesting, I guess, parallel tracks that are running alongside kind of our lack of storytelling and faith is our disconnect from our extended families and clans, and so. Our kids kind of don't feel like they're part of something, biologically, like father and father's father and father's father. And therefore in the faith world, we're not really doing a good job of helping them understand the big story of God that they're caught up in. But I think a way to practice is by telling our kids stories from our family, if we can, like even if they're just stories of you when you're a kid. But it'd be great if they could talk to a grandparent or an aunt or read a memoir that someone in the family tree has written, because I think the practice of helping them place themselves in their family story might then help them place themselves in God's story. But both of those have a little bit become fractured in our Western worlds, because we're living such isolated nuclear family lives where it's just me and my household, whoever that might be, and it's not even mum, dad and 2.5 kids. It's so different and so varied now.
Yeah. And even in that is I've seen parents as well start idolizing their kids, so it all becomes about the child. Again, it sort of speaks into that individualistic nature, or what are you actually sharing or impressing on your kids. So if you make your whole life now about them and you're not actually including, like you're saying, your family, or even if people don't have family, like their church community, because that's who we're adopted into God's family. If you're not including that community, then I mean, it's understandable that kids grow up thinking, well, it is about me. I have to figure it out on my own, and like there isn't anything bigger. So it's a harder gap to try and connect, to think, well, actually we're a part of God's story, and these are all these different, like my uncle or my aunt or so and so from church, that they all connect. And I think that's a part of it as well, is when as parents we make too much of our kids.
Well, I mean, like Tim Keller has written some beautiful stuff on this about counterfeit gods, and he has probably written the best book I've ever read and the best quotes that you can find about idolatry in our modern world. And, you know, he talks about an idol is anything that captures your heart and captivates your attention, that you spend more time wondering about and thinking about than God. And what more could you substitute in there than a parent's child? You know, like I spend so much time thinking about my kids, wondering about them, worrying about them.
Yeah.
And it's basically saying that is idolatry. Anything that we hold as more important, that if we lost it, our life would no longer be worth living.
Yeah.
That's an idol. And I think in many ways, every parent is idolizing their kids. And we as Christians need to work out how to hold it in balance.
Yeah.
How to love them with everything and give them our best, but not hold them above God in the way that we view the world.
Yeah, very good. I know you mentioned at the start of our conversation, and it's sort of been a theme throughout, is how we find ourselves having very busy schedules. The modern day schedule is just chock full of things to do, tasks to tick off, or experiences even to have. But how do you integrate your faith and make it a natural part of family life, using spiritual practices so that we're not sucked into this vortex of filling every moment with things to do? And how does that look like?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is rediscovering the spiritual disciplines and kind of reprioritizing that in our own life. So, I mean, Moses says in Deuteronomy 6, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. These commandments are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. And I think the starting point for all of us is to go, am I allowing God to transform my heart? And how much time am I giving that in my schedule so that I am loving God with every fiber of my being?
Yeah.
And that's going to involve reprioritizing and rediscovering some ancient, beautiful traditions that we modern Christians have gone, oh no, we don't need to do Sabbath, and we don't need liturgy, and we don't need to sit in silence. And actually, yes, we do. And in fact, in our modern worlds, we almost need it more than before.
Yeah.
And so rediscovering what it means to really to prioritize gathering with God's people, praying, being silent, fasting, Sabbathing, finding wonderful rites of passage and wonderful ways to mark seasons and celebrations like Easter and Christmas, and making sure that our lives are fully wrapped around our core purpose of allowing God to transform our heart. And then I guess as parents, it's thinking through, how can I do all of this not in secret and not in isolation?
Right.
So we have very individualistic faith. So we say, you need to go to your room and read your Bible and close the door, and you need to, do all of this by yourself. And our churches are set up like this. Adults go here, kids go here. We keep it all very separate, and we keep it all very individual.
Yeah.
Which means we're never learning how to talk about and include our kids in our own faith practices, because we never get taught how to do it. We never taught how to read the Bible with a child in a way that invites them into it.
Right.
We're not taught how to pray with our kids or invite them to transition into Sabbath as part of their week as well. And so ways that we can involve our kids in our spiritual practices so that they're also participating in the spiritual practices. Because, recent Australian research is showing that we are not thinking our way into faith. So adults who become Christians are practicing their way into faith. They're not thinking their way into faith.
Yeah.
And so often there are spiritual practices that begin before the kind of official moment of conversion. And so they start praying, or they start reading the Bible, or they start attending church, and they go on mission trips, or they participate their way into faith. And our kids are going to do that too. Our kids need to participate and be part of spiritual practices at home, church community, finding ways that they can be involved as much as possible, serving on rosters, using their gifts, sharing what they're hearing God saying to them, because that's all part of them building their muscle of kind of becoming part of God's beautiful story. And we hope that they will participate their way into their own faith as well.
Yeah, I like that. I think, I think that's something important that you've hit on. There's I can't remember who says it. It could be John Mark Comer, or it could be someone older, or James K. Smith, who talks about the habits of the heart, and says the things that we do something to us. And then there's I don't know if you've heard of the French philosopher René Descartes. So he's famous for saying, like, essentially we're thinking beings. So humans are essentially brains on sticks, which is completely false, because that's sort of the ideology of our time, is that, like you're saying, we can think our way into things, which isn't actually happening. We are very much thinking things. So we approach everything in this logical manner. If we consume more information, if we have more resources, that's going to change us. That's going to impress something on our hearts that will turn us in the right direction that we're wanting to go. But that's not actually what we're seeing happening. And it's the same if you think of like running. If you just think about running and you do all the research on what shoes you should buy or clothes you should wear, at the end of the day, it doesn't make you a runner or able to run. You actually have to practice it, and you have to begin to participate in that community. And I think that's a really important thing that you've touched on, is that we need to bring our children into this place of participation, which I found at times in a church setting, it can be awkward, because especially for someone like myself who has younger children, who they're essentially learning about, like, oh, my vocal cords can go this high, and I can run in this direction, like I can do these things, and like I'm wanting to include them in, this is like what me and mum do in worship and these things in church community or meeting during the week. But then there's a difficulty as well, because it's like, well, at what stage do you need to just be like, okay, someone needs to look after the kids? Or is it not like that? It's just like, okay, we just need to have understanding for one another. What's your thoughts on that tension that parents face in community?
Yeah,
okay.
Like young kids and trying to do this, it is wildly inconvenient and often, exposing, like, as you say, like your kids tearing around church and you're trying to get them to sit still and they don't. I have 3 sons as well. So sitting and doing anything quietly is not really part of their makeup just yet. They, like, it is all systems go at all times. And so this for me has been really, really hard. Now, we planted a church, which means that there was no lovely little old lady or no beautiful teenager coming and taking my children from me, even if I wanted to hand them over. So during these years when I had toddlers and babies, we didn't have a kids ministry. And I actually think, as wildly painful and hard as that was, it forced me to work out how to have a faith and how to still worship and learn and grow, even while I'm trying to keep kids somewhat contained within a space. And then there were more kids, and all the kids are like taking over, and it almost felt like you were just at a giant playgroup, even though it was supposed to be church. And I've got up and tried to preach a sermon when there's been more kids in front of me than adults, and it's really hard. But what it means is you literally rethink everything. So you go, I probably should do a 10-minute talk, not stand up there for 25 minutes and expect everyone to listen. And I should probably think about the songs that we're going to sing and try and help the kids learn the words and the kids can't read. So, we had a beautiful couple that taught our kids and our adults actions to the worship songs, and we were singing songs with actions, and the kids were learning them. That season for me taught me so much about what is possible, but what it meant was everything had to be on the table for change. Yeah. So all your typical components of a church service had to be rethought in light of the fact that there were kids present and part of it.
Right.
You probably couldn't do the R-rated passages of scripture without forewarning parents that you were going there. You couldn't show a clip from a really terrifying movie in the middle of your sermon. You can't tell a story about your kids when they're in the room in a way that you might. You really got to think differently. And so it's hard. It's painful. I would have loved my kids to be babysat during church, but it was just not possible. And I think if you're trying to expect a child, especially a kid like mine, to stand and sing during a worship set that could go for up to half an hour, where you repeat a song a lot, but they're just words on a screen, to sit there quietly while someone gets up and does a 15-minute announcement about something that has nothing to do with them, to expect them to sit through a 25-minute sermon without any thought or engagement for them, that's way too high a bar for a kid who's a toddler or even in primary school. So you've really got to think about, you've got to have a child first lens and think, well, what is a realistic expectation of a child in church? And if we're going to have them in church, which we should for parts of it, the parts that they're in need to be really centered around the fact that the whole church family are going to be together.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And I think, again, it brings into thinking of community holistically as well, that we have these children who are involved in our lives and we don't want to, again, make it about a certain individual. But it's I love it. I'm just picturing it's that's what a family is about. It's yeah.
Well, when we have an extended family gathering, we expect and cater for everyone who's going to be there. We have a section on the table that's set for kids. Maybe it's lower, but they're still part of the table, or we have a kids table set up, and we expect them to be there and we expect them to be kids. And yet at church, we either get rid of them or hide them in another room.
Right.
Or we expect them to be mini adults, and my kids just could never do that.
Yeah. I mean, so many parents, I think it's the exception that kids are able to do that rather than the rule. I'm keen to pick your thoughts on, I know you go through it in your book, this idea of the trellis concept and the whole thing of the rule of life, because I think that helps answer the question of, we're not just thinking beings. We can't just consume more information or just go to church on a Sunday and listen to a sermon and then suddenly be changed one day. Share us what you mean by this trellis concept or the rule of life, and what have you found helpful rhythms for families to consider in spiritual formation?
Yeah, so a trellis, in your garden is that structure that you put behind a young plant and you help it to grow on something that is sturdy and true and predictable. And with young plants, you literally weave them onto the trellis as a way of guiding their growth in a certain direction. So you come out every couple of days and find the new little sprig and you kind of weave it back into the trellis. And I think, the trellis is a reflection of this rule of life concept that is kind of a spiritual discipline, a life that is structured around ways of loving God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and practices that help us do that. But the thing I love about the trellis in a family context and passing on faith is this picture of intentionally weaving a child's life into the rhythms and practices that we're setting up for them. And it requires a bit of a little bit of guidance and gentle kind of weaving them on. And, and so I think about, it's thinking about daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, and seasonally, or like kind of rites of passage moments, and how can we structure our life of faith on those sorts of rhythms, and then gently weave our kids into that rhythm as well. So things like reading the Bible and praying as part of our daily lives, and how can we do that with our kids, for our kids, and in a way that's visible to our kids. So that's, something. One of the things that I think families can really get on board with is the weekly practice of Sabbath.
Okay.
And church might be part of that, but I mean, my husband and I work at church, so we sort of do our Sabbath not on a Sunday because that's a different thing for us. But for many families, a Sabbath involving church is a beautiful rhythm. For us, we do a much more, Jewish tradition, as in it's the Friday night thing. But again, we don't do a strict 24-hour, don't do anything. I've listened to a bunch of John Mark Comer stuff. I love his posture around Sabbath. And for us, we approach it as it's a transition moment from the productive working week to the resting and delighting in God. And we do things that help us rest and delight.
Yeah.
And so that involves going to our kids' sport. It involves going to friends' birthday parties. It involves having people over. It involves chilling out and watching our favorite sporting team. So we're not strict on what we do, but we view it through this lens of resting and delighting. But the thing I think families can do together is the transition moment. Yeah. The moment of coming together. We light a candle sometimes and we sit there and we say, what will help you rest? What will help you delight? And we just have this moment of transition where we kind of say to our kids, the working stuff is done and we're now transitioning into rest. And part of the joy of living into the rhythm that God has given us is we get to rest because he rested. He made the world in 6 days and then he paused. Yeah. And it's a beautiful practice to help kids realize that faith is about reflecting the rhythms that God built into creation, and some of that is not being productive and not doing and just being.
Yeah. I love that. We're human beings, not human doings. What would you say when you're practicing Sabbath? Is there a framework that you, or like some guidance that you go through that is helpful? I know you said you ask yourself and each other what will be restful, what will we delight in. So does that mean then not doing the laundry, or like in terms of dishes, like does that mean just putting the dishes on hold or using recyclable plates so you can just throw them away? What does that look like for you guys?
Some people do that, and I think, when you read some of the books, like even John Mark Comer's, some of his stuff on Sabbath, it's very much like that. For me, honestly, it's like putting on a different pair of glasses, and so I will do the washing. I will do the washing up because it brings me delight to live in a house that's clean, and I do not want to spend my Sabbath with a sink full of dirty. I couldn't rest in that space.
Right.
So, but for me, I do it with the lens of this is bringing me delight because it's caring for the space that I want to rest in. Yeah. We might need to set an alarm to get up really early to take a kid to a soccer game in the pouring rain and the mud, and that's not super fun. But we just view it through the lens of this is our Sabbath and we rest and delight and we love to play sport and this is what we do and we love our kids and we love to spend time with them. So I think for me, I'm very much, lots of people would say that that's not a Sabbath, and I'm okay with that. But for me and where my family life is at, I still do most things, but I view them differently. Yeah. And I will opt out of some things. If I'm I don't really, that's not going to bring me much joy. That's a thing that or oh, I'm just doing that to progress this project. I would try and avoid things like that. But it's, I do still do chores.
It sounds like what you're saying as well as how you structure your Sabbath is around your family as well. So it's like doing things together. Whether it's going in the rain to a soccer match or something like that. Because I suppose you could just drop them off and then go do something yourself. But it's like that idea of, we can actually find opportunities and reframe our lens. Or like you said, put on different glasses and see it as an opportunity to rest and delight in our everyday lives that God's put us in.
I mean, one of the pet peeves I have is when reading about spiritual disciplines that it's written by either a man or a pastor, and they talk about their ability to Sabbath or do spiritual disciplines.
Yeah.
And I'm like, where is your wife and kids? Because someone's with your kids while you're Sabbathing. Or they talk about doing it on a Monday.
Right.
This is my day when I Sabbath. And I'm like, well, most people can't do that. Like,
so disconnected.
Most people have to work. And so I think for me, I'm really passionate about, like, how can we do spiritual practices in our modern busy families?
Yeah.
And in a way that doesn't mean that someone else has to babysit our children while we spend time with the Lord. Because I just don't think that that's the way that things were done even decades ago. I don't think we found a babysitter so we could grow in our faith. I think we needed to do that in the midst of our life.
Yeah. Have you heard of the book Domestic Monasteries?
No.
This is it's by a Catholic priest called Ronald Rollheiser. But a friend of mine put me onto it. It's like the smallest book you can imagine, but it's talking exactly what you're saying. Is he basically says, like, it's targeted to parents and basically saying your household is your monastery. So in a monastery, there's bells that go off at random times, and that's to reposition your heart and put your delight and affection onto one, like going on to the next task. So it's to say whatever you're doing doesn't need to have an end and you can move on. But then also not to get so consumed with what you're currently in, but actually be present in like moving on. But he relates it to parents, and I've found this so helpful in that, like, being a parent of a young like baby, newborn, toddler, there's like you just can't find time, or it feels like you can't find times to do these spiritual practices or disciplines, like something like just being able to read the Bible or practice solitude or prayer or silence, even like silence with a toddler, like 3 boys. You know, and he takes the burden of that off by saying, well, there's actually moments throughout your day where these bells go off, and it might be you need to change a toddler's nappy. It might be the dishes need to be put in the dishwasher, or the washing needs to be folded. Like, there's these moments where they can reposition our hearts and draw our affection back to God in a place of delight, and we can see, instead of as a distraction or a disruption to our day, we can see it as a delight, like, and cause our affections to go toward God. Like, thank you so much that I have this beautiful gift that you've given me, that I can change like her nappy at this hour in the morning or during the day or whenever it is. I found that really helpful, and it's exactly what you're saying, that like it looks different to different stages that people are at, but at the end of the day, I think there needs to be a freedom and a lightness in it, that we can't expect our lives to look a certain way when we read these books by these pastors or authors, that it just seems like everything is so perfect, when in reality, like, your life is so complicated and messy. But what we can do is reframe and see, well, this is a beautiful opportunity to take a breath, realize, like, the amazing gift of life that God's given us, draw our attention back to God, and practice like Sabbath in those moments, but also to practice gratitude in those moments.
Yeah.
And it might not look a certain way, but it's still doing something. And I think there's a lot of freedom in what you're saying. So yeah, thank you for that reminder, because I think it's so important for parents to know that they're doing a good job, and that they know less of a human, no less of a Christian, because they don't find the hour a day to spend on their knees in prayer in the closet. Obviously, we'd love to be there, but sometimes circumstances are just different.
Yeah, and we've got to prioritize it, but it doesn't need to look a certain way. And I think that's where we need to find, like, you know, my book is all about, like, make this important. This should be really, really important.
Yeah.
But then the how is like, you know, it doesn't need to look the way it did in your early 20s. It doesn't need to look the way that our churches have told us it needs to look. It doesn't need to look by yourself, you know, alone, as you say, in a closet, you know, like for long periods of time. Like, we need flexibility about what it looks like to prioritize faith in our homes, and in some ways acknowledge the modern busy family, in some ways go back a few decades or even centuries and rediscover the togetherness and the wonder and beauty of just kind of intergenerational existence, and sort of find a happy medium where we're not legalistic about what to do, but we are really, really rigid on the fact that it's important and it's paramount and we need to do it, because there's a generation of parents, if we don't do it, then the whole next generation are going to miss the gospel because we didn't do the work.
Yeah, very good. I love that. And yeah, I think that's super important. One more question before we sort of bring it to a close. You mentioned something that you think about and that you do with your children is this idea of rites of passage. Maybe just give us a snapshot of what that looks like for you, and how I think that'll be helpful in like how parents can start thinking about what is a rite of passage, why is it important, how can we frame it or think about it.
Yeah, I guess our eldest son is about to turn 12, and so we're really kind of just thinking about the next big one, and really for us, you know, that transition from primary school to high school. I think the thing with rites of passage is that in Australia and in a lot of Western countries, we don't have them at all. There's no kind of set things that we do as kind of people travel along the journey of life. And possibly the rites of passage have become things like when you give your kid their first phone, and when they get their driver's license, and when they get to drink alcohol. And I think, like, they're not great markers, right? like
Right.
And particularly, you know, the phone thing, it's like, oh, here's a thing that's going to completely ruin your life. And we put that as like, you've made it, you know, here's your phone, here's your car, here's, you know, your ability to go and drink alcohol. Like, they're just, they're fine. But that's all we've got in Australia. So I do think that as families, we need to think about what are the key moments in time, you know, starting school, starting high school, turning 10, turning 13, I don't know, other ages that we want to name. Churches have rhythms, like some kids get dedicated. I guess in Catholic churches there's kind of baptism and confirmation, you know, so there's baptism in there. So there are rites of passage that we can reclaim as Christian families and go, well, what are the ones that we want to do with our kids? You know, do we baptize them or christen them or dedicate them at a certain age? What about adult baptism? At what point are we happy for that to be part of our kids' life? And then thinking about other markers in time, thinking about ways of kind of incorporating faith as part of that. And I guess another aspect is thinking about other people to bring into that. So we're thinking about our son, and as he starts and transitions to high school, and we're sort of mapping out a kind of small holiday he can go on with certain specific other adults. So not just us, but there'll be other people that we invite into that space as like all right, this is a really big moment in time. And then it's also something for our younger sons to go, oh, cool, when I'm about to go to high school, I get to go on this adventure, and there's going to be these other cool dads that come along and share input into my life. And so that's what we're hoping. That's
awesome. I love that. And one last thing that I'm starting to do with our guests is for you to ask a question to our next guest. So in terms of around life, faith, what question would you want to ask them? And then also, how would you answer it for yourself?
Okay, so in terms of the next guest for your Upside Down People podcast.
Yeah.
I would ask, in what ways are you walking the other direction to everyone around you? So, this idea of being upside down people, this idea of following Jesus as countercultural, and we kind of need to go the other way to everyone around us.
Yeah.
And I think just hearing from people in what ways they're actually doing that.
I like that. That's brilliant. I would, you're the first guest that I'm starting this with, so I don't have a question. No. So thank you for being a trendsetter.
Great.
I've really enjoyed the conversation, Ainsley, and thank you for the work that you do and writing your book. If people are wanting to find out more about yourself or grab a copy of the book Impress that you've written, where would you direct them to?
So I'm on Instagram at impress.daily, and that's just a little reminder and encouragement for parents to follow along. Throughout the book are QR codes to a link tree, but in terms of a website, if they just go to olivetreemedia.com.au, you can get the book and you can find out more about Impress. And I also have a weekly email. Basically, you can sign up and get a year's worth of weekly reminders about impressing faith. And so you can get that through the Instagram link tree or also on our Olive Tree Media website.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that. I'll put a link up in the description to those places as well. Thanks for your time, Ainsley, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Caleb. It's been a pleasure.